Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we are going headfirst into Swami Vivekananda's take on the
Yoga Sutras.
Patanjali Yoga Sutras.
Yeah.
It's
Those excerpts.
pretty heady stuff.
Yeah, they are.
So this is going to be like a express lane to some core yoga philosophy.
Yeah, they're the bedrock. I mean, this is the foundation. And the excerpts you've shared, these are great because they cover everything from the nature of your mind to your consciousness, and the path towards liberation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking Chitta, Vrittis, Purusha, even obstacles to concentration.
Right.
And the practices that help us gain control.
Yeah.
And even yogic powers.
Yeah.
All right. So where do we start?
Well, I think a natural starting point is Chitta and Vrittis.
Okay.
The modifications of the mind stuff. So, we can think of the Chitta as sort of like the canvas of your mind. It's the basic substance. Right? It's not conscious on its own.
Okay.
But it's the field on which consciousness is playing out.
It's the raw material.
It's the raw material.
Right. And then the Vrittis are the brushstrokes on that canvas, the constant flow of thoughts and emotions and all of it.
Yeah. And Vivekananda uses a beautiful image. He says, you can think of your Chitta as a lake, right? And it's the water of the lake.
Okay.
And the Vrittis are like the ripples and the waves on the surface of that lake.
So as long as the surface is disturbed, you can't see the bottom.
Yeah.
Which, in this analogy, I guess, is the true self.
Right.
Okay.
So the goal is to get that lake perfectly still.
Gotcha.
And here's a really interesting point. He's saying that, the reality that you perceive, the universe as you experience it, isn't really some objective external thing that's exactly as you see it, right? It's more like your mind reacts to stimuli coming from outside. And then, he uses a great analogy of an oyster creating a pearl around a grain of sand, to say that, the universe as we experience it is really a creation of our own mind stuff in response to external suggestion.
So like I'm looking at my phone right now. That phone as I see it isn't actually like
not exactly
out there in the ether in that form.
Right. No, it's your mind's interpretation of it.
Okay. So it's like the external world provides the spark.
Right.
And then our mind shapes it into something that we can recognize.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these Remedies are going on
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
But there are different types of mental activity.
Sure.
Like how do Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva, how do they play into it?
Yes. Those are the three gunas.
The three gunas.
Yeah. And these are they're the fundamental qualities that permeate all of nature, including your mind.
Okay.
So Tamas, is characterized by inertia, darkness, tendency towards inactivity and delusion.
Okay.
Rajas is the principle of activity, energy, striving, attachment to results.
Okay.
Power seeking, all that.
Gotcha.
And then Sattva, that's the one we want. Sattva represents clarity, harmony, balance, a state of peaceful awareness.
Now, when we hear calmness in Sattva, it kind of sounds like being passive.
Yeah.
But the sutras suggest it's more potent than that.
Much more.
Yeah.
Yeah, much more. So Vivekananda says that, Sattva, the serene calmness, is not weakness. It's not inactivity. It's a manifestation of superior strength.
Okay.
Right? It takes a lot more power to consciously still your mind.
Oh, yeah.
Than it does to just let it go wherever it wants to go.
Yeah. Like trying to hold back a strong current.
Yeah.
Versus just
floating along.
Floating.
Yeah. So the key for you in your daily life is to recognize these tendencies and then to make conscious choices that cultivate that sattva, that calm strength.
So the goal isn't to just have a blank slate for a mind.
Right.
It's to actively cultivate
you want that,
this state.
Yeah.
Okay. And is our mind naturally geared towards that state?
So the sutras do imply that the Chitta naturally wants to return to that pure, tranquil state, right?
Yeah.
But all the barrage of sense input is pulling it outwards. Right. It's being pulled outwards all the time. So yoga is about gently redirecting that inward, right? So restraining the senses.
Gotcha.
Outward focus.
Okay.
And guiding it back to its essence.
Okay.
To its essence of pure intelligence.
It's interesting because it also mentions that all living things have Chitta, but it's only in humans that it can fully develop into intellect.
Oh, right.
What's the significance there?
Well, they're saying that, it's the development of the intellect,
Okay.
right? This is the human capacity for higher reasoning, discrimination,
Yeah.
that is essential for liberation.
Okay.
Without it, your mind stuff just can't fully go on that introspective journey back to the self.
Okay.
So it's your human intellect that becomes a crucial tool on this path.
Gotcha.
If you use it wisely.
Okay. Now, the 5 forms that Chitta manifests in, scattering, darkening, gathering,
Yes,
one-pointed, and concentrated.
Yes.
How do those relate to our daily mental experience?
These describe a whole spectrum
Okay.
of the quality of your Vrittis.
Right.
So, scattering is when your mind is just jumping around from one thing to another,
Right.
driven by whatever fleeting pleasures or pains come up.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Darkening, this is associated with Tamas, right? This is a state of dullness, confusion, inactivity, could even lead to harmful actions.
Okay.
And then gathering is when the mind starts to turn inwards.
Okay.
Because you're making an attempt to
Right.
focus,
Okay.
but you're still struggling with distraction.
Gotcha.
One-pointed is when you can actually direct your attention
Yeah.
to a single object.
Okay.
And then concentrated, this is the deeper state. This is
Right.
the state that precedes Samadhi, where the mind is really absorbed in its focus.
Right.
It's like going from a chaotic mental landscape
Right.
to a laser-like focus.
Okay, so it's this progression
Yeah.
we all experience
Yeah.
in different moments.
Yes.
Going from
Yes.
scattered, reactive.
Yeah, to
there's-
focus, to concentrate.
Concentrated. Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the seer,
The Purusha.
the Purusha.
Yeah.
So who or what is that?
The Purusha is really like your true self.
Okay.
It's the pure consciousness.
Okay.
That underlies all the mental activity.
Okay.
It's like the silent observer.
Okay.
It's the witness behind the every shifting mind.
Okay.
And so when your mind becomes still
Right.
and concentrated,
Right.
the seer is said to rest
Okay.
in its own pristine, unmodified state,
Okay.
completely separate from all those
Yeah.
fluctuations
I'm
of
here
your
to-
thoughts and feelings.
So it's like the lake analogy again.
It is.
When the lake becomes totally still, you can see
Right.
all the way to the bottom.
Yeah.
And that's your true
Isn't-
nature.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about when our mind isn't in that concentrated state, which is pretty
Really,
late
most of the time, for most of us.
most of the time?
Yeah.
What happens then?
Well, then the seer mistakenly identifies with
Okay.
the modifications of your mind.
Okay.
Right?
With those
With those Vrittis.
Vrittis.
And so he gives a very relatable example. He says, imagine if someone criticizes you, right?
Okay.
So a vritti, a ripple,
Right.
arises in the mind, and you tend to identify with that, right?
Yeah.
You feel hurt.
Okay.
The true self, the Purusha, is completely unaffected.
Okay.
It's totally unaffected by that criticism.
Okay.
But through this false identification,
Okay.
you experience it as your own pain.
Okay.
So that's that feeling of taking things personally.
Gotcha.
That's the seer mistakenly identifying with the
Yeah.
mind's reactions.
So much of our suffering comes from
Right.
that identification.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, we've been talking about these Vrittis.
Yeah.
These
Mental modifications.
mental modifications. And
The sutra.
there are 5 classes of them.
Right.
So what are those 5?
5 classes of Remedies are right, knowledge, indiscrimination, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory.
Okay. Let's break those down a little bit.
Okay.
Right knowledge.
Right knowledge refers to valid ways of understanding reality.
Okay.
This is the way things actually are.
So how do we attain that?
Indiscrimination is just that it's a lack of correct understanding.
Okay.
So, it's mistaking one thing for another.
Okay.
And then verbal delusion, that's knowledge that's based only on words
Okay.
without corresponding reality.
Okay.
Sleep is a specific state of modification where there's just a temporary absence of conscious thought.
Okay.
And memory is the retention and recall of past experiences.
So how do we attain this right knowledge?
Well, there are 3 primary sources.
Okay.
Direct perception, which is your sensory experience,
Okay.
as long as it's not distorted.
Okay.
Inference, which is coming to conclusions
Okay.
through logical reasoning based on your perceptions.
Okay.
And then competent evidence, which
Sure.
is the testimony of
Yeah.
those who have deeper understanding.
So like what
Yogis.
yogis
Yeah.
and seers.
So their insights
Yeah.
and experiences are considered valid forms of proof.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Because they transcend the limitations of just our normal human reasoning.
Okay.
They experience truth directly
Oh.
within themselves.
Gotcha. Okay, so our minds are
Right.
constantly generating these
Constantly creating these modifications.
right.
And we're trying to move towards
Yeah.
this inner stillness
Right.
and clarity.
Yeah.
So how does yoga actually help us do that?
The definition of yoga in the sutras is the restraint of the modifications of the mind stuff.
So gaining control over...
Yeah. Gaining conscious control over
Yeah.
those mental fluctuations.
Okay.
And the ultimate goal of this is to attain samadhi.
Okay. Now, what exactly is samadhi?
Right. It's a state of super consciousness
Okay.
that goes beyond.
So it's more than just like intense focus
Oh, yeah.
or deep meditation.
Right.
What's the key difference?
Yeah, it's more than that. It's a transformative state
Okay.
where the mind becomes profoundly focused
Okay.
and you transcend your
Wow.
usual limitations,
Okay.
dualistic perceptions.
Okay.
And the sutras distinguish between samadhi with seed
Okay.
or savija
Okay.
and seedless
Okay.
or nirbija
Okay.
samadhi.
Gotcha.
So in savija,
Yeah.
there's still a subtle object of concentration.
Yeah.
There's still a seed of thought.
Right.
But nirbija samadhi, this is the ultimate aim.
Okay.
This is a state of complete cessation.
So seedless means that there isn't even...
Even the potential
Yeah.
for future disturbances.
Okay. That sounds profoundly liberating.
It is, yeah. It is.
But to get there,
But
you
bits of process.
face all these obstacles.
Yeah.
So what are they?
Well, the sutras identify 9 of them
Okay.
as the main
Yes.
distracting element. Okay. And they are disease, mental laziness, doubt, lack of enthusiasm, heaviness,
Right.
clinging to sense enjoyments, false perception, non-attaining concentration,
Okay.
and instability.
Okay.
So falling away from the state.
I think anyone who's tried to meditate
Yeah.
can relate to
Yeah.
several of those.
Yeah.
Are there any other indicators?
Well, these mental distractions
Okay.
are often accompanied by physical and emotional disturbances. So, grief, anxiety, tremors in the body, irregular breathing.
Okay, so those are like
These are all like
warning signs.
warning signs.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so how do we actually tackle these?
So there are some,
Yeah.
some key remedies.
Okay.
One is practice,
Okay.
one pointed, right?
Right.
Consistent, dedicated practice,
Right.
focusing the mind on one thing at a
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
Another is cultivating certain mental attitudes towards others. Okay. So being friendly towards those who are happy,
Okay.
compassion towards those who are suffering,
Okay.
joy towards the virtuous,
Right.
and equanimity.
Yeah, that equanimity thing
Yeah, that's a tough one.
is a tough one.
Yeah. But, he's saying that, by reacting with negativity, it just agitates your own
Yeah.
mind and depletes your mental energy.
Right.
So by cultivating that indifference,
Yeah.
you're conserving energy.
Right.
You're preventing
Okay.
further disturbance.
Makes sense. What else?
Pranayama, right.
Pranayama.
Conscious regulation of prana.
No, prana's not just the breath, right?
No, it's not. And this is important.
Yeah.
Vivekananda is very clear
Go ahead.
that prana is the fundamental life force.
Okay.
Right? This is the vital energy
Okay.
that permeates the whole universe.
Okay.
The power behind all movement,
Okay.
including breath, including thought.
Okay. So
So
for
it's
you,
consciously controlling this
Right.
vital energy.
Yeah.
We can
you can.
directly influence the mental state.
Okay. And then Ida, Pingala, Sushumna, these are all like,
Yeah, so
is-
so later schools developed this into
Yeah.
a whole sophisticated science, right?
okay.
So mapping out these intricate energy channels
Okay.
within the body.
So by regulating our breath,
Right.
we're
Through
actually
influencing
a
Dolly.
deeper energetic current.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's powerful. What about, are there other forms of concentration recommended?
Yeah, he talks about, focusing on extraordinary sense experience
Okay.
that might arise,
Right.
meditating on an inner light,
Okay. gotcha.
concentrating on a heart
Okay.
that's detached from desires,
Okay.
reflecting on the insights gained from dreams,
Okay.
or simply choosing any object or idea
Okay.
that feels pure and still.
So it's really about finding a point that can hold your attention
Okay.
and gradually quieting the mind.
Right. Okay, now, We've also been talking about Ishvara, the
Yeah.
supreme ruler.
Right.
How does that fit in?
Yeah, so this is interesting because Sankhya, which is the underlying philosophy, doesn't really include a personal god.
Right.
However,
Okay.
yoga
Okay.
introduces Ishvara
Okay.
as a special Purusha,
Okay.
a self that's eternally free and untouched by all of our human stuff,
Okay.
like suffering, action, results, desires.
So not like a traditional...
Not like a traditional creator god.
Yeah,
It's more like an eternally liberated being.
Okay.
The ultimate teacher,
Right.
unbound by time.
Okay. So devotion to Ishvara.
Yeah.
Ishvara Pranatana.
Ishvara Pranatana, yeah.
How does that help?
Well, they say that by focusing your devotion on this ideal,
Okay.
it helps to purify
Right.
your mental tendencies.
Okay.
And it enhances your ability to concentrate.
It's a way of anchoring the mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Kriya Yoga, this is a preliminary set of practices.
Right.
What does that involve?
Yeah, so Kriya Yoga
Okay.
involves three things.
Okay.
Tapas,
Okay.
which is self-discipline.
Okay.
Svadhyaya, which is self-study.
Okay.
And Ishvara Pranatana,
Okay.
which is surrender to God.
Self-discipline or austerity.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of tough.
Well, it's not really about harsh self-punishment, right?
Also
It's more about directing your energy and impulses consciously, gaining mastery over your body and senses, and choosing, what serves your growth.
And then self-study is about turning inward.
Turning in and out.
Understanding our own nature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then surrender is about
Yeah.
letting go of the need.
Yeah. Letting go of the need.
For a specific outcome.
Yeah. To just find peace in the act itself.
Okay. So we're building a strong inner foundation.
Yeah.
And then we can address the 5 kleshas, the root causes of suffering.
Yeah.
So we've talked about ignorance.
Right.
What are the other 4?
The other 4 are egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life.
Okay.
So ignorance is the root cause.
Right.
And it's the fundamental misperception.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Mistaking the impermanent for the permanent, the impure for the pure.
Okay.
What brings suffering for happiness?
Okay.
The non-self for the true self?
Right.
Egoism arises from that.
Yeah.
That false sense of I.
Right.
Attachment is just your attraction to pleasure.
Okay.
The desire to hold on to pleasurable experiences.
Okay.
Aversion is just the opposite.
Right.
It's your dislike of painful experiences and your efforts to avoid them.
Right.
And clinging to life is that deep-seated instinctual fear of death.
Okay.
And the desire to continue existing.
So these kleshas are the root of so much of our unhappiness.
A lot of our unhappiness. Yeah.
And how do those create these samskaras?
Well, samskaras are like the subtle impressions or tendencies that are left in your chitta by every thought and action.
Right.
And the kleshas act as that underlying energy that fuel those impressions.
Okay. So, for example, like
if you are
attached to a pleasurable experience, you create this.
You create a samskara.
Samskara.
Right.
A mental groove.
Right.
That makes you want to repeat that experience. And so it continues. So it's this self-perpetuating cycle.
Right. It is.
Ignorance fuels these negative tendencies.
Right.
Which create
the impressions.
Right.
Yeah.
And then those
impressions
shape your future.
Shape our future actions.
Yeah.
And we're stuck. Okay.
Yeah.
How do we break that?
Well, meditation is presented as a primary tool for consciously observing.
Right.
And beginning to weaken those more active surface level modifications, right?
Okay.
The more ingrained samskaras, those need to be addressed by resolving them back to the root cause.
Which is egoism.
Which is egoism.
Okay. Expert speaker.